Hi, everyone. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. What a great opening video that we just saw, and of course, heard Baron in the background. But I want to go ahead and jump right in with our building wealth within our community and investing in our culture panel. Super excited to be having this discussion and really making sure that we're able to move the discussion forward with some of our great panelists. We have Mario Ruiz joining us from PayPal Ventures.
Hey,
Hi,
Kori.
Mario. How are you?
I'm good. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to join us. I just want to give people, though, a quick little background on you for those who perhaps are not as familiar. You are an investor with PayPal Ventures, specifically focusing on investments in the US, domestically and internationally. And prior to joining the PayPal Ventures team, you were an investor at Napier Park here. Well, I say here because I'm in New York. In New York, where you're responsible for the evaluation, diligence, and execution of growth equity and real asset investments. So thank you, Mario, so much for joining us. And I think we're just waiting on a couple of our other panelists to join right now as well. But since I have you, Mario, I think I would really like to kind of kick things off with the path to really building wealth, and specifically with what you do at PayPal Ventures. Can you explain to our audience the unique space that you guys are operating in when you think about your investment strategy?
Absolutely. And I think PayPal, the approach we've taken is, if there's two paths to create wealth in the US, one via small businesses and really bootstrapping a business to growth. PayPal is making a big commitment there around our products and services and really thinking about ways where we can build intentional products that help all communities, but specifically the Black community and Latinx community, around shepherding that growth at the earlier stages of building a business, whether it's a mom and pop shop, a bodega, whatever it may be, really to help with those business and tools and services to do that. And on the venture side, thinking about like all the wealth creation that has happened over the past decade, 20 years, thinking through ways where PayPal Ventures will really help support founders in that growth and evolution. And so we'll get a little bit more into it in this conversation today, but one big announcement we made about 6 months ago is around a $530 million commitment to support Black communities and Black lives. And as part of that, there's a $100 million effort within PayPal Ventures to support venture capital GPs. And so out there, if you're raising a fund, if you're Black and Latinx, let me know. We're investing in funds to really help accelerate that early stage ecosystem.
Yeah, and one of the funds, I got to shout out my friend really quickly that I know PayPal put some capital behind, Nasir Quadri at Zill Ventures, a good friend of mine from our days back at Hampton University. Yes, he's a great guy and very happy for PayPal's investment in his fund. Oh, I see that we have the rest of our panelists have jumped in. So I just want to backtrack for a second and quickly introduce our two other panelists. We have Brian Rumao from Next Play Ventures, everyone. And Brian actually is the chief of staff to the executive. Next Play Ventures, he was the chief of staff to the executive chairman of LinkedIn. And Brian was VP, as I mentioned, and chief of staff to the CEO of LinkedIn. During that time, he actually managed strategic initiatives and the operational rhythm of the business. He was able to launch and scale new cross-functional programs and develop leadership communication and company narratives. And also our last but definitely not least panelist to join us is Tanya Van Court. She is the CEO and founder of Goalsetter. What a cool company it is that she runs, because Goalsetter is the best savings and financial literacy app in the market for kids and families. Goalsetter uniquely engages kids from all backgrounds in understanding how to build wealth and learn financial language by offering fun quiz-based games that are developed using memes and gifs from hip-hop artists. Who doesn't love a good meme? Social media influencers and pop culture personalities. So I just want to bring you into the conversation, and where we had just kicked off with Mario was him giving us a little bit of background, since is in the venture space at PayPal. So Brian, I'd like to bring you in as well to this part, since you're also on the venture side. If you could just tell our audience right now, what's the unique space that Next Play Ventures operates in as it relates to, investing in our culture?
Yeah, Kori, thank you. And first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you to Baron and V and the whole Big Factory team for putting this summit on and for inviting us. Really happy to be here and join you all. It's obviously an important topic, so I'm excited to dig in. Just a little bit about Next Play Ventures. So Jeff Weiner and I started this. This is Jeff is the former CEO of LinkedIn and current exec chairman. We started this earlier this year, and our mission at Next Play Ventures is to coach and invest in entrepreneurial leaders building world-class purpose-driven organizations. So the key word for us there is coach. So when we invest, we really want to be in there with the entrepreneurs and help them as they grow and they scale their business. And so that's one component of it. And the second component of what we focus on is really mission-driven organizations, companies that have a really deep sense of purpose of why they're doing what they're doing. And same with the founders. They're in it for the right reasons, and they're really trying to improve the world around us in meaningful, tangible ways. And so that's a little bit about Next Play Ventures. And again, thanks for having me on.
We're happy to have you. Tanya, I want to bring you in to this conversation from the founder perspective, especially when you talk about financial literacy and building wealth within our communities. Can you just explain a little bit more about Goalsetter and the unique void in the market that your financial literacy program for children is filling ultimately, right, to be able to start to build that sort of wealth within these underserved communities?
Sure, I'm happy to. And again, thank you to Baron, to V for having us here. I'm so excited for the work that Big Factory does, and so really honored and humbled to be a part of this. So for us, the interesting thing about where we sit in this market is there are many other fintech platforms that are out there, that are several that are focused on kids, but most of the people who are developing fintech apps typically come from the financial services space. And you can imagine why, right? They develop domain expertise and then they move into the financial services space, but they do it for kids. I happen to have a very different background. I actually was at Nickelodeon, where I ran preschool and parenting digital at Nickelodeon. So everything I did was about how do you engage and excite kids from a media perspective and still educate them. I was then at Discovery Education and launched digital textbooks across the country that were all about multimodal learning for kids. So when you talk about a financial app, for me, it's very personal. It is, how do I look at finance and the history of finance with communities of color in particular, but with all communities in the United States, and how the financial services institutions have not necessarily served these communities and taught all people, here's how you save, here's how you invest. These are smart financial decisions versus financial decisions that are not going to serve you in the long run, that will ultimately only serve us as a financial institution. And so it's a very personal subject for me, but it's also one that I come with a lot of domain expertise in. So Goalsetter is an example. We have a teen and tween debit card. Our teen and tween debit card is called the Cashola card. And so when kids get a Cashola card on Sunday mornings, their card will actually freeze if they haven't taken their financial literacy quiz for the week yet. And the minute they take that quiz, their card unfreezes. So, we are on a mission to get a savings account into the hands of every kid in America. Kids who have savings accounts are 6 times more likely to go to college. They're 4 times more likely to own stocks by the time they're young adults. So if there's any way that we are going to reverse the curse of the wealth gap in this country, we can do it by focusing on kids. But the savings account is part of the solution. The other part of the solution is really about financial education. And we know that kids love debit cards. We know that kids want to spend money. Let's teach them how to save and invest before they swipe.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Tanya. It has been spanning generations for far too long. And I want to read this for everyone just to make sure that I don't mess this up, because the Peterson Foundation found that among college-educated households, white families had a net worth of $360,000. Latinx families had a net worth of $73,000, and Black families came in with a net worth of only $68,000. I want to bring this back to you, Mario. Is it possible to effectively invest in our culture with the wealth disparity is as vast as it is, even when you think about PayPal Ventures and the 500, I think you said $60 million that you guys are focusing specifically on these underserved groups?
Absolutely. And I think what Tanya mentioned hit it really on a nail, which is like, it starts with when you're young. And speaking of myself personally, I'm born and raised in the Bronx, grew up in a lower income neighborhood. My family's from, I'm also Guatemala, dad's from Puerto Rico. In my household, financial education was never talked about. We didn't talk about balancing checkbooks. We didn't talk about getting credit. For us, it was really, just saving as much money and not putting it in a bank, but putting it under, the proverbial mattress. And I think for a lot of communities of Black and Latinx, it's that same mindset, which is, it's preservation of savings and preservation of dollars and not necessarily investment in it. And I think that when you change that mindset of like preservation to investing, it really switches the gear. And so I think, Tanya, what you're building with Goalsetter really hits it on the nail, because it's building that intentionality early on in your education and your life to make sure that when you're becoming a teen and becoming an adult, that mindset's already there. And I think from a PayPal perspective, we're really thinking about investing holistically across communities, people, and obviously in the tech ecosystem as well. And so as I think about this broader $530 million commitment, it's around investing in CDFIs and minority banking institutions that are really bringing the dollars closer to where the communities of color are, but also investing in the best-in-class startups that are already there but are undercapitalized, and providing that mindset where if you raise that capital, there's more of an abundance mindset to invest in yourself, invest in growth, and kind of help really scale into that next leg of growth. And I think that happens with both Main Street America and small business, but also on the venture side as well.
Yes. And Brian, do you kind of see the same thing with what you're working on Next Play Ventures, specifically as it refers to getting capital, right, to the founders that need it most, or even if you're acting in more of a fund-to-fund sort of perspective, and making sure, right, that you are doing things specifically aimed at trying to close the wealth gap?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, Tanya, if you haven't already closed Mario and PayPal Ventures on Goalsetter, I feel like that's the next step after this. You've got Mario as your next VC. That's amazing, Mario. And I completely agree with what you talked about with the importance of starting early. So for us, it goes back to being intentional. I think this is not going to be solved. I mean, Kori, you mentioned this. This is generations. It's hundreds of years of compounding effects in terms of the wealth gap. So this is not going to be solved overnight. It's going to take some time, but we have to be intentional about it. And I think part of the first step is recognizing that there's a problem to solve here, that there's a big gap right now in terms of who's getting funded and who's not getting funded. And when you look at where the dollars are going in VC, it's between 3 to 4% that are going to Black founders, to Latino and Latina founders. That's a problem that we've got to solve. And that's why what Mario is doing at PayPal is so important. It's also why, Kori, you asked about our role. One of the organizations that we partner with very closely is called Concrete Rose. Sean Mendy leads Concrete Rose Capital, and he's got a foundation associated with it. And they are exclusively focused on supporting founders from underrepresented backgrounds, supporting founders who are building companies in a way where they are prioritizing diversity and inclusion and belonging in terms of how they run the company. And they're investing in companies that are providing real value and focused efforts on underserved communities and overlooked segments of the population. So that's one example of how we think about partnering with organizations, whether it's Concrete Rose or others, who are really making a big difference in the community right now.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And actually, Tanya, now that my memory is catching back up with me, I actually think I saw you spoke at a Harvard and Tech event at Amazon in New York City. This is like back when people got together, so a long time ago at this point, a very long time ago. I was like, wait, this all sounds familiar. Yes, that makes perfect sense. But as someone who's gone out, first of all, and actually raised VC money, what is it that you feel is missing or is needed at this point to make sure that founders like you, right, are getting the access to the capital from people like Mario, from people like Brian, in order to stay on this mission of investing in our culture and making sure that we're not making the same generational mistakes that have preceded us.
Kori, I'm so glad that you asked that question because, you know, I was a part of an accelerator program and they said, Tanya, you're amazing. We want to have more Black founders in our accelerator program. How do we connect with those Black founders? And I said, look, I could bring you, you know, a yellow book of Black founders. That's not hard to do. I got plenty of Black founders in my network, right? But once I bring them to you, you're going to have to change your lens about what constitutes success based on where that founder is in their journey. Right? I can't tell you how many times I was told no by VCs because I didn't have enough traction. But my white male competitors had raised $3 million in their first meetings in a seed round, and I raised $2.5 million over 4.5 years. You show me somebody who can prudently spend $2.5 million over 4.5 years, creating the best product in the marketplace and get 100,000 customers. It doesn't exist. But those are the standards that, you know, Black founders are held to, that female founders are held to when we show up at your doorstep and you say, okay, well, I would invest, except you need to go get more traction without the same more money that your counterparts are getting. And, you know, without any recognition for all of the things that you have done with the limited funds that you have had. I really do think about this conversation as being no different than the diversity conversation of higher education 50 years ago. Right? It was, hey, you know, that Latino kid from the Bronx doesn't have high enough SAT scores, so he can't succeed at Harvard. He would never make it to PayPal Ventures and be, you know, an amazing executive at PayPal Ventures because his test scores aren't good enough. No, his test scores aren't good enough because he didn't have the resources that are often aligned with and tied to good test scores. He didn't get good test prep. He didn't go to great private schools in his neighborhood. And so we need to stop pretending that resources are not directly related to the amount of traction that companies have at the early stage. And we need to recognize that and look at these African-American, Latino women founders through a different lens. And that's the lens of reality and what they've achieved based on what they had. There needs to be an ROI based on what was invested and how do we determine the return of what was invested, not, you know, what other people got. And I'm going to compare apples to oranges in this game.
No, I completely agree. And as someone, which I just realized I didn't even thoroughly introduce myself at the top, but I run a media company that specifically creates business news for hip hop culture. And I always talk about how what we're really doing is shifting mindsets. And that's not something that you easily see on a 5-year ROI chart, because if anything that 2020 has taught us, when you talk about shifting mindsets, that is not something that happens overnight, to say the least. But I actually want to give you, Brian, and Mario a chance to kind of respond to what Tanya just said about changing that lens and the way that you look at really getting, you know, the funding to these underserved founders.
Yeah, and I'll start off. I think Tanya again hit on a nail. That was great, and I think a part of it, and maybe reframing it in a similar ways, I think it's all about distance traveled, and whether it's that student who was, you know, grew up in underrepresented and underestimated background and that got into great jobs later on, that gap from where they started to where they are now took a lot more grit, resilience than perhaps someone who had it a lot easier. And I think perhaps when we think about underrepresented founders, like that, it really is the modicum of success, right? It's like where they came from and where they got to where they were on the capital that they've used, the resilience they had to build their company through all the opportunities that they perhaps didn't get, you know, the color of skin or the gender that they associate themselves with. And so a lot of this, when I think about from a venture perspective, it really becomes an ecosystem question. And I think, you know, PayPal Ventures, we're investing in funds. And I think a part of it also is around investing in funds that are led by Black Atlantic GPs. And I think as part of the ecosystem, we need to help the founder issue, which is about providing capital support at the earlier stages, but it's also thinking through how can we increase diversity across the venture capital ecosystem as well, because if we continue to have the same folks who are writing the checks, they're going to have the same biases to the table every single time and not invest in the Tanyas of the world. And so it's around actually also thinking through how can we increase the pipeline of folks in the venture stage who are there, have authority to write checks as well, because that's when the real kind of change happens, when both sides of the table start to behave and think that more aligning closely.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to tell you really quickly. By the time I raised my first $1 million, 86% of that money had come from Black people, brown people, and women. And so, you know, if you take the corollary of that in the venture space, only 14% of the money that I raised came from white men. And so, you know, if we are not increasing that pipeline or the representation in the venture space, we are going to continue to have that same, you know, pattern. So thank you for doing that. And I'm so sorry, Darren, to you.
You know, I would just say I completely agree about this compounding effect here. I mean, to put it in an example, usually when a founder starts a company, they'll raise a friends and family round. They'll go to their friends, they'll go to their family, and they'll say, can you spot me 10,000, 15,000, 5,000? Well, when you think about the wealth gap that Kori mentioned at the top of this, and you're a Black founder or you're a Latino founder, that capital may not be as accessible to you. And so you're already behind the eight ball. Not only have you been behind from start to where you are today in life, as you're starting a company, you're now behind your peers and other founders who have access to capital in a much, you know, more efficient way than you do. And so I think Tanya, to your point, this is about us recognizing this disparity. It's about us recognizing and appreciating that to get to this point, that founder has had to have, as Mario mentioned, that grit, that resilience, orders of magnitude more than other founders who may have had access to capital much easier than they would. So I think for us, it's about recognizing that. And once we recognize that, there's really tangible things that we can do. At LinkedIn, about a year and a half ago, we looked at this concept of the network gap. You know, we're familiar with the wealth gap that we've talked about. There's also a network gap because what we've done based on the research that we've looked at, it's based on where you grow up, where you go to school, and where you work. And if you work at the best companies, if you grow up in the right neighborhoods, if you go to the right schools, you're going to have a better quality network by the time you're in the workforce than those who don't have access to great companies or to great schools or didn't grow up in the right areas. In fact, we've looked at the research, and the difference between those who benefit from those three dimensions and those who don't is 12x when it comes to the strength of a network. So you may not have access to those kinds of relationships that you need. And so one of the things that we try to do at LinkedIn and with Next by Ventures and more broadly is something called the +1 pledge. +1 pledge says every time you take a meeting with a traditional founder, let's say it's somebody who's not an underrepresented group, you commit to having a +1, which means that the next meeting you take is going to be with somebody who is an underrepresented minority or from an underrepresented group. And so it's a way to make sure that you yourself are keeping yourself honest in terms of the type of pipeline you are having as a VC. And it comes back to that intentionality. And so, you know, I commit to myself of taking that +1 pledge, and it's not going to solve everything, but it opens me up to having conversations that I might otherwise have not have had. I might have said, they don't pass the screen, they don't pass the filter, I'm not going to meet with them. But instead, I do take the time to meet with them, or I reach out to them on LinkedIn and we have a great conversation. I may not invest immediately, but I'll connect them to others in my network and hopefully help mentor them and help connect them to others who could benefit from that type of coaching as they grow their business and then as they raise more capital. So I think there are these steps that we can take, even if we're not necessarily in a VC role, of just being intentional about who we speak to, how we build our network, and who we reach out to.
No, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Brian. It's super duper important. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom, because there are some good, really good things happening in this space of investing in underserved entrepreneurs. We are actively seeing the needle move. I think about my friend Nasir, his Zeal Ventures, as I mentioned. I think about Keisha Cash just closing her $55 million Impact America Fund too. And the list goes on and on. And Richard Kirby at Equal Ventures, those sort of people that are really doing great work. I'm thinking about Candace Brackeen. The list goes on and on and on. There are people on the funding side. There are definitely entrepreneurs of color that are going out and raising more money than they ever have in the past. So since we are able to see that needle move, albeit slightly, when it comes to shifting this paradigm on investing in our culture, I think I'd like to close with this, with each of you all. What else are we getting right in this space that makes you all extremely optimistic and hopeful for the future? You know what, Tanya, let's go ahead and kick it off with you.
Here's what I think we're getting right. The Underground Railroad is alive and well. There are people who have their light on at every organization that I've talked to. There are people, and they could be folks who look like the folks on this call or folks who don't look like the folks on this call. There are people who have the light on and are saying, I see you. I see how hard your journey has been. I know how hard you have struggled, and I'm here to make this passage just a little bit easier for you. So count me in, count me as an ally, count me as a supporter, and we are going to do something meaningful to move you and your efforts forward. Right? And so those are people who are actually committed to the cause and who are using their power, using their privilege to make a difference. And I see so many good people like that every single day who have been helping us at Goalsetter, and it is making a difference.
Thank you. Mario or Brian, want to get in
Yeah.
on what you guys think we're getting right in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of it too is just the amount of entrepreneurship and innovation is happening. I mean, I think actually COVID, one of the perhaps silver linings of this all is that people are home and dreaming and thinking about what to do next, right? And so whether it's be the tech company you start, or if you're on Instagram kind of selling goods and services that you are passionate about, I think that entrepreneurship lifeblood has always been there. But I think particularly in this moment of time, there's that hustle that continues to drive, and in finding ways to earn other types of income to have the economic mobility. And I think that continues to drive through, particularly during COVID. And I'm excited for, in the past, during COVID, obviously there's been a ton of social unrest and the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. And I think that what I'm passionate about and I'm excited about is that this doesn't feel like a moment right now. It feels like this is really going to push through beyond this. And is it take everyone on this call and beyond that to really make sure that this isn't a moment, but really a watershed effect for decades and generations, and it's really collaborating and bringing everyone together.
All right, thank you.
I totally agree with Mario and Tanya. This is more than a moment, and just the fact we're having this conversation, gives me optimism. We're talking about it, and I think that's the first step. We're talking about it, we're bringing it out, we're surfacing it. There's two other things that I would call out, Kori, to your question about what gives me optimism. One is folks like Mario and PayPal Ventures, folks like Andreessen Horowitz, Concrete Rose, and Sean Mendy, I mentioned, firms who are taking a stand and really demonstrating and putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to investing in underserved founders. That's one. And two is I can't tell you how many conversations I have these days with founders who are saying, when I think about the cap table and when I think about raising money, I want to make sure the VCs I work with are also diverse. And those are conversations that I think we wouldn't have had years ago, but now it's increasingly the case where the founders are taking the time to be really thoughtful and intentional about the cap table that they build. So I think it's both of those things, the founders and the VCs becoming more diverse in terms of how they think about their growth, and they think about their teams, and they think about where their money goes. And I think it's going to take time, but we're on the right path, and I feel really optimistic about that.
See, that's exactly what I think, we need to hear, that there is hope for the future, for the founders, for the funders, to really start to make a difference, and like we've never seen before. I do want to open it up to the audience for Q&A, though I will say I'm not exactly sure how I would be able to see the questions. So maybe someone from Switcher Studio could chime in and let me know, how do I see the questions from the people? I'm not even sure what to click on. And I don't want to accidentally hang up on all of you guys by hitting the X button. If there are any questions, but if there aren't any questions, or we're still trying to figure out exactly how to bring that to fruition here for all of us to hear or be able to at least see the question on the screen. I would like to say, from someone who has spent a lot of time speaking with investors in the media space as not just a woman, but a woman of color, it is disheartening to some extent when you think about the Diane Project's report about statistically the actual amount of venture capital, right, that goes to Black women specifically is 0.06%. To be a 0% statistic, do you know how low on the totem pole you actually, it's not funny, I'm not laughing in that way, but do you know how low on the totem pole you actually have to be to have a 0% statistic? And this is with more than $300 billion of venture capital money out there. So I do just want to bring it back specifically to focus on women of color and investment. Is there anything, Tanya, advice-wise, that you can give to women of color who are entrepreneurs that are thinking, you know what, I can't keep trying to go this route to raise money because the path and the road is too hard?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I've been there so many times in this journey because it really is too hard. I mean, initially I was told kids finance is not a thing. And then, you know, white men came along and did kids finance plays. And guess what? Then it was a thing. And then I went back and said, hey, VC market, you guys are now funding kids finance, fund me. And then I was told, well, now you have well-funded competitors. We couldn't possibly fund you now. So, you know, at every turn, it really does feel like the industry is conspiring to keep Black women out, right? Because this is not like, you know, admission to Harvard, as I, you know, made the analogy before. It becomes like we are going to pour our money into these kinds of folks. And then once we pour our money into these kinds of folks, game over, it's too late for you to join, right? And so that is, you know, it is the frustrating reality of being a Black woman in this space. And you see it every single day. Right. I think so many people were frustrated by the recent election and seeing 50% of our country vote for someone who, you know, is clearly racist. But if you're a Black woman entrepreneur, you feel that dynamic every single day. And so what advice would I give? I mean, I think the advice that I have to give is, number one, we do have to, you know, you can't waste your time on people who have proven themselves to not invest in folks like you. Over and over and over again, right? You've got to go and find those people who do invest in Black women. And the unfortunate part of it is, you know, throughout my journey, it's always been like, well, hey, have you talked to, you know, 5 funds, right? So that's why we get 0.06%, because the rest of the world is encouraged to talk to 5,000 funds. And we are always encouraged to talk to 5 funds. Oh, I know they happen to fund Black women, right? But unfortunately, you're wasting a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of calories on people if they have demonstrated they don't invest in Black women. So you got to focus on, the good news is it's no longer 5. Right? The good news is there is Concrete Rose now, and there is, you know, PayPal Ventures that is dedicating some of time and energy and resources to this. So the good news is they're no longer 5. So that would be my first counsel. Focus on more than those 5. My second, or focus on those. My second piece of counsel would be ask other Black women who's invested in you, and can you make introductions for me, right? Because those introductions carry a lot of weight, and they can also steer you to people who they know are, you know, more likely to be working on their unconscious biases. We all have them, right? But the third that I would say is to look at crowdfunding kinds of, or crowd raising kinds of sites. You know, Republic has done some extraordinary things. And, you know, I think that when you're in desperate times, they require desperate measures. And sometimes as a Black woman founder, you're in desperate times and you're like, I just got to get over this hump. I see, you know, the vision. I know where I'm going and I know I can get there, but I just need some money in the door in the next 90 days. So those are the 3 things that I would say, Kori. You know, and also just, the road is not going to be easy. It's just not. So you got to, you know, you got to buck up, you got to put on that armor, and you have to get people flanking you on your team who are going to support you in those downtimes, because it will be a hard journey. But, you know, we have had hard journeys before. We've had 400 years of hard journeys. So, you know, you can do this.
No, perfect. That is excellent advice. All right, well, I want to thank you all so much for joining our panel. I hope it was as useful and impactful as I definitely know I feel it was. And there are going to be more panels coming up throughout the day. I also want to once again thank Baron, thank V, thank the entire big team for really bringing these conscious conversations to the forefront. So thank you all very much.